welcome to episode 16 of the Just Run podcast with me, Reese Morgan, and Nathan Marshall. Nathan's not going to join us just for the first bit due to some personal commitments, but he'll be jumping in shortly. Thank you to anyone who tuned into our last episode with Martin Rutherford. He's an inspiration, and his upcoming challenge sounds incredible. He's taken on the 3 peaks, but with a twist. If you've not listened yet, check it out, and listen back to hear all about, and also how to donate as well, because he's doing it for an amazing cause. On today's episode, we're joined by Leon Bustin. Leon has achieved some amazing things over the years. For those who don't know, in 2023, Leon ran the entire length of Britain, so 840 miles from John O'Groats to Land's End. So basically the far north of Scotland to Cornwall. He's one half of the infamous Lean Machines, who have built a huge following over the years, an ultrarunner, online coach, personal trainer, author. I could bore you. And one thing he is great at is a bloody master reel maker as well on Instagram. So if you haven't seen, jump on and have a little look, because he makes some great videos. Leon and his family have recently moved to Costa Rica. Huge commitment, and that's where he's speaking from today. So join us on this exciting conversation and let's have some fun. So, yeah, without further ado, Leon, hello.
Hello, mate. It's what an intro. I've got a hell of a lot to live up to now, haven't I? So I will also as well apologize to any of the listeners if there is any cutouts or changes in my voice and it goes robotic every now and again, because we are in Costa Rica. And I'm 7 hours behind you guys. So I'm just proud that we've even got to this point to have the conversation with the logistics with people's diaries and stuff. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and answer your questions.
Thank you very much. But yeah, I was going to say, what time is it there now then? Is it, so it's what, 20 to 8
12:30.
here, isn't it? 12:30.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
20 to 1. It's lunchtime. So I'm running on a protein ball and a dream, baby. So we're doing good. I just ran from my last client call to the fridge, grabbed a protein ball and scoffed it down as I came in here to do this. So we're good. I've got some energy. Otherwise, this would have been a very, very quiet podcast had I not had that protein ball.
I can imagine, mate. I didn't ask what the weather's like there because it's probably going to piss me and the listeners off. Like,
Oh
for
yeah,
anyone.
let's just skim over it. It's not even worth going there.
Oh man, I really want to ask, but I also don't. I mean, I would show you outside, but right now it is so bleak. I mean, what?
Is
We're
it?
on the 1st of May and it feels like we're in November or something. It's been nothing but rain and
Yeah, I've heard.
yeah, but whatever. You made a brave move, and I bet it's worth every single second. So, yeah, actually, well, I won't ask about it. We'll come back to that in a bit. I guess the first question I wanted to ask you, Leon, if you don't mind, is how or what was your reason why when deciding to transition over to running ultras and stuff? Because correct me if I'm wrong. I know you've done a lot of CrossFit and stuff in your past,
Of course.
and you didn't make that transition until your 30s, if I'm right.
Yeah.
So
Classic
what?
ultra move. Man hits his 30s, decides to run far. It's a classic move in some ways, but to be honest, running has always been a consistent in my whole life. From a performance aspect in terms of boxing, I used to do lots of conditioning for my boxing, and it was a big thing that I learned on before that. Cross country for my health. I had really bad asthma when I was younger, so it really helped with my anxiety around asthma attacks, doing some cross country and that kind of stuff. So it's always had like a constant involvement in my training. I've never been that classic person who says, "Oh, I fucking hate running. It's stupid," and then I just do it because I have to. I'm always honest to say I've been blessed with a little bit of natural ability with running through years and years of doing it. It's always been good for my mental health as well as my physical and performance health. And then, yes, I had been doing a lot of CrossFit, 5, 6 years of just throwing tin and doing burpees, and it was wonderful. Absolutely loved it. Um, but when the dreaded word COVID happened and I was forced to be at home with my beautifully equipped gym, very privileged to get to that point in life, which was my only dream as a teenage boy. I want a home with a gym at home. I had everything that I needed to continue my CrossFit training, but I hated it. I just stopped, had no passion for it, no drive. And I think it was because it was the first time in a very successful 7 to 8 year career with my business partner, JC, for the lean machine stuff, where we'd actually had time to stop and take stock of what we were actually doing. You get so caught up in the momentum of what you're doing that you don't ever get the time to ask the question of, am I enjoying this? And unfortunately, our business had become so revolved around CrossFit that I kind of felt like I had to do it, not necessarily ask the question of whether I wanted to. Our sponsors at the time were like Reebok. We were building a relationship with Nike at the time around the Metcons, and it was like, if I step away from CrossFit now, I'm kind of screwed because my whole identity's around it. And then there was that mixed with a sense of I became a father and my ego disappeared. Some people talk about the ego as a bad thing. If you're making every decision based with your ego in mind, yes, it's going to be a bad thing. But sometimes a little bit of ego is simply just wanting to commit and wanting to push hard and caring about the process in which you're taking part in. And I had none of that. My daughter was born. I stopped setting alarms. I was going through the motions with my workouts. And one of the things that was hard with CrossFit is because I'd been doing it so long that it was definable. Fran, horrible workout, but it's not going to take any more than 4 minutes. Doing
Mm.
Murph, horrible workout. It's not going to take more than an hour. So sometimes that comfort in the definition of how long all my workouts were going to be was actually losing my motivation, opposed to switching on my strategic mind of like, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to push hard there and I'm going to, which is the way it used to. I was yearning for a challenge that I didn't know all of the answers to. So I decided to, having at that point only ever run a half marathon. The ego was still there because I decided it couldn't be a marathon because everybody runs marathons. I've seen the London Marathon too many times that I'm like, well, I could get around a marathon. I'm a fit guy, I'm conditioned, I could suffer around a marathon. But what I didn't know is whether I could do an ultra because there was something about that shiny ultra stage of like 50 kilometers. I know it's only like another 8 kilometers, but it's a long way. And not a lot of people do that. So that's where the ego fed that a little bit and decided to do it for Mind charity because at the time, people's mental health was suffering massively. Ran a 50K route around my local city, which was miserable. Just went on and drew a circle on Strava and was like, fuck it, that'll do. And then, as everybody will usually say, I learned more about myself in the last 6 kilometers of that 50K ultra from just grunting it out than I've learned in the last 10 years in my training. And that was where it started. It wasn't just the physical output and the performance, and like where I'm at with it now is really strategic. I periodize everything effectively. I obviously coach massively in the training and fueling strategy space now, but back then it was bare bones of just get round and figure it out. And in that 6K where it was super dark, I'm peeing licorice, going, what the hell's going on? I was reduced to a version of myself that I'd never met. And I think one of the things that a lot of us as men and as human beings try to hide from with our muscles and our clothes and all of the other shiny things that we put on, like our armor, is we hide from that version of ourselves because we're not sure how to deal with it. And
Mm.
I was faced with that version of a man hanging, I remember leaning over a fence, peeing out literally like licorice because I completely screwed my fueling strategy and was weeping to myself and looking for the excuses of how I could make this stop and how could I limp a little bit more to say that I'm in too much pain to be able to finish. And to be faced with that version when you feel like a gladiator was quite humbling. And then to then take more steps to say, no, we'll make a decision in 500 meters. I will make a decision in the next kilometer. To then cross the finish line, my daughter runs towards me. I give her a cuddle, and it was wonderful. That the amount of growth I experienced in that 6K was remarkable. And that's where it started. Just a need to do something to see if I still had a little bit of ego. That was it.
That's mad. That's isn't that crazy? I mean, CrossFit is no easy feat. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I tend to. You made a good point there about the CrossFit workouts, like the Murph and all these. This short, but the volume. I mean, they're intense. You are dead
Yes.
afterwards. So yeah, the fact that you were able to do that, but then those last 6Ks are what broke you down to a version of yourself that you'd never ever experienced. And I know what you mean, and everybody listening, including Nathan, will appreciate that it is true. You go through such a suffering, like it's the weirdest, most lowest point of your life, like because you think you're fit, and then you do
Yeah.
that, and you think, "Holy shit, I am broken." Like
Yep.
I am trying to look for the next lamppost, or like you said, any reason to get out of moving forward here. But you have that strong urge to just keep doing it, and it's crazy. Some people, and it is crazy, but I think we're all, to a certain extent, we are attracted to discomfort because we've got all these wonderful things around us, and like you walk into a house, you got a roof over your head, you got a gym, like you said, you got a button you can press to have a nice hot shower and get a
Yep.
nice car, drive to work or sit at home. But then do you do something like that, and that all goes, and you're just reduced to a
Yeah.
shell.
Our pure
And
self, you know.
yeah, and that's pure. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, pure. So you did that, and
Yep.
then you decided to run a 250-kilometer race in Sri Lanka over 5 days.
Now, so let me just be very honest. I didn't decide to do that. So this was June of 2021 that I did the 50K. And where we obviously previously spoke about social media and my business and that kind of stuff. I obviously had it on social media, which draws attention. And at the time, a good friend of mine, Hannah Tilsley, she worked for a company called UltraX, who I'm now an ambassador for. And I love the bones of that company. And I love Hannah to bits as a friend because she introduced me to the wider space of Ultra. If it wasn't for her, I genuinely don't think that would have been my next step because it was
Mm.
ballsy to go from suffering through 50K in June to then completing and coming third overall in 250K in the following March. That's a big step. So she
Yeah.
contacted me in the July and said, "Look, Leon, I've just seen, a nice bubbly way that she does. Leon, you've just ran a 50. How about you come and do one of our events?" And I'm going, "What's UltraX?" Like, I'm so naive to this space. I'm like, it's when I first looked at it's like CrossFit when I first looked at Olympic lifting. I'm like, what the hell is this? I'm used to bench press, right? So she just basically said in like a collaboration, um, we'll give you one of our race entries for free and you document it. And I'm like, okay, the only way that I can approach this and get through it is if it's a destination that I want to see. Right. So one of the biggest things that people still don't believe about my running journey with my very short career is it's still exploration based. So it's like I pick my races based on where I want to see. And I'm like, what a better way to see somewhere than run it? So
Yeah.
I had a look at the 5 day ultras that they had. She said, you might as well come and do the Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan because it's in October. And it's funny because this will be a full circle moment. And I crapped myself. I was like, I am never going to run across a desert, let alone in 4 months' time. So then I said, well, Sri Lanka is a place I've always wanted to go. How about I come and do Sri Lanka with you next March? So we agreed on that. And then I underwent the most phenomenal prep that I've ever had. One of the things that I've always said, I've been in the industry as a coach for 10, 15 years now, but I will always outsource my own training. Anytime that I'm taking something on, I bring a coach in. My coach, Sam from Kings of the Wild Frontier, he gave me stuff that I pretty much knew to a certain degree, but it's not that what you're paying for. You're not paying for a periodization when you do ultra coaching. You're paying for a therapist. You're paying for somebody to give you the stuff that you don't want to do and you know that you'll avoid. And you're paying for the reassurance that you're doing what you need to do. Because I think the obsession with ultra is that you can do too much. You feel like you're never ever doing enough to get ready for the race in hand. So most people that I coach myself, half the time I'm actually pulling them back like toddlers in reins. I'm like, you need to calm down. So I did a 4.5 month prep. Um, and in prep terms, it went perfectly. No injuries, no issues. Peaked at 208 kilometers, I think, in my final peak phase. Or simulation week. Went out there and then found myself crossing the line in third overall of 60 athletes. And I'm like, oh, we've got a bit of skin in the game. We can have a bit of a go here. And Sri Lanka wasn't ideal because we had the fourth day got completely cancelled. as we had a monsoon basically come in. On day 3, we get to a beautiful camp by a lake, and it starts to rain, and everyone's like, it's been 40 degrees all week. This is brilliant. And I remember me and a good friend of mine, Lewis Robling, stripped down to our pants and stood out in the rain, like, take me, because it was so warm. And then the rain got harder, and we're like, oh, this is amazing. And then the rain got so hard that it was hurting our skin. And we're like, I think I'm going to go back in the tent. And then the next 30 minutes went from this is hilarious, like it's really, really raining, to an emergency evacuation from this lake because the whole place flooded and we could barely get the trucks out in this point. And we're like, it was a real serious situation very, very quickly. And we all open air camped in a local church. They just put us up and let us lay sleeping bags down. But what the result was the whole course, the next 70-kilometer day, the route had been flooded. So we were no longer able to do that route. And the part of my ego that was still there was I didn't know whether I could run 70 odd kilometers because up to that point, 50 kilometers, even in my prep, was still the longest run I'd ever done. So we finished day 4. Well, we drive to the final camp instead of doing day 4. And one of the things that was born in my mind on that day was one of the reasons that I would classify myself as quite successful and why I'm successful in the ultra space is we went to the final camp, which we were supposed to arrive at the following day, where they had beers, they had a pool, they had a bar. Like it was a proper celebration because we were going to arrive there on the last day as well. And I did the maths in the car on the way there, and I was like, well, if I don't do the 4th day and I only do the 5th day, and I've only run 192 kilometers, I want to run 250. I'm not going to be able to do 250 because we're going to be driving for 4 or 5 hours to get there. I was like, well, the only logical thing is I want to get at least 200 in. So we arrive at the camp and 50-60% of the members there decide to, which rightly so, they were obviously sane human beings, rest, have a shower, relax, unpack, and unwind for the afternoon. Some people even got in the pool and had a couple of beers. I literally, with one hand, took my bag off the back of the truck, threw it down, and with the other hand, unzipped it. And within 3 minutes, I was ready in my run kit. I went and got some water from the restaurant in the hotel and proceeded to run. I think it was 18 kilometers in the end. 18, 2K out, 2K back repeats until I'd done 18 kilometers to make sure that I'd got well over the 200-kilometer mark. And what was amazing about it was that, first of all, it created a bit of a cult. So it created momentum where other people decided to do the same, where I'd managed to, without trying to, it was not about being a sergeant major, but it inspired other people by me just doing me. And it showed an aspect of my personality and the way in which that I coach and manage people now, a skill that I didn't know existed. But then also as well, it unlocked a power of discipline, if you want to call it that, and completing what you said you were going to complete to the best of your ability that I didn't realize that I'd had before doing ultra. So went out in the heat of the day, did all my repeats, came back, still didn't have a shower, still didn't have any beers, because again, future gratification is really, really important to me. And I think is really important in ultra. So I was like, well, I smell like shit like I have done for the last 3 days, and I'm going to continue until I finish the last day. Because the second I start to allow comfort in, it really, really, the floodgates open. So that was really, really transformative to me. And then the final day was just party time. Got out, ran it, finished 3rd, jumped in the pool, got pissed, and it was great.
That's mad. Yeah, you mentioned Lewis. We've had him on the podcast actually. He's me and Nathan are close to him because he does the whole wiry run thing. So he's
Yes.
been down here a few times with Bigmoose, and we've been on a few runs with him. He's a top bloke. Lewis is fair play.
Yeah, he's a very good human.
Yeah, he is. He is. So then that was 250 or thereabouts, and then you did hike. So then you ended up jumping into Jordan and doing that anyway.
Same year.
Same here. So
Yes.
you said
So
you would never
I
run through a desert, but you did it anyway.
exactly that. So 2021 was 50. 2022 in March was Sri Lanka, about 202, 204 kilometers. A redemption for me was I want to make sure I do the 250 because that was the goal that I set out to do. I
Mm.
originally was doing Mexico in November of the 2023. Me and Lewis were really excited to run this one together because it was going to be his final one of all the 250s that he was doing that year. So he was
Mm.
completing all of the UltraX 250s in 1 year. And then through a few reasons, political unrest, financials, and changes of course and stuff, Mexico got cancelled. And I was actually on my way. I was driving across Europe in my camper van with my family for a little bit of downtime in Portugal, before the prep really started to kick off, ready for Mexico. And I was like, well, I haven't got a race now. I was like, screw it. What am I going to do? I've got my flights are booked. They're non-refundable. The race is not happening now. And the guys were like, you can jump on any of the other races if you want to. And the only race that was in the diary for that year, which wouldn't have ruined like the prep foundations that I'd already put in, that would still work, was Jordan. And I was like, why does the universe want me to run across the desert? It's stupid. And at the same time as I was battling with this, my wife had originally had a week's retreat in the same week that Jordan was happening. So it was always a fundamental no, can't happen. And then I'm driving and she's like, babe, just so you know, that week, that retreat's just been cancelled. I'm like, what retreat? She's like, the one at the same time. If you wanted to do Jordan, you can do it now. And my insecurities are going, fuck, don't do it, don't do it. But I did it. So I just said to Carly, I was like, if I can change my flights from Mexico to Jordan and it doesn't cost me a ton of money, then I'll do it. But if I have to pay like 400-500 quid to change my flights, then screw it. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to change the flights to next year if they bring Mexico back. And
Mm.
then the wonderful lady on BA changed them for like 25 quid. And I was like, oh, great. So we're in. And then that was it. I get to Portugal and I start being an idiot and getting up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, sliding the camper van door open as slow as I can to not wake the girls, and then go and run across the beach multiple times, thinking this is simulation for running across the desert. So then in October, fly over to Jordan, run the Wadi Rum Desert, which was spectacular, 250.6 kilometers, I believe, was my final distance, and then finished sixth overall, fifth male.
Wow.
In I
Wow.
think there was around 140 people who lined up for day one. Yeah, it was a pretty good year.
Wow, that's incredible. I don't know if you've seen on my videos actually, but talking about UltraX and everything, obviously being an ambassador. So I've been speaking to Sam a
Yeah,
lot and
great
those
human.
guys. Yeah, and I'm basically I've spoken to Sam. His words exactly were, "If you're that fucking mental, then we'll support you." But basically, I'm trying to be the first person to do all 13 of them in 1 year next year. That's my
Yeah,
challenge.
banging.
So I've already signed up to Rwanda, so I'm doing that in the January. Um, and again, I'm basically in the process of trying to get some backing and funding because, as you know, they're not cheap and they don't include flights. So obviously, I
Nope.
need sponsorship. I want to try and get to the start line and try and get some sponsorship behind me to help support that and the logistics and the flights. And then, provided I can do that, I'm doing it all for cancer research. So that's what I want to do.
Perfect.
Because my old man has got prostate cancer, so he deals with it daily, and I've lost loads of friends and family to it. So I want to do it for a cause close to my heart. But yeah, it's so I'm signed up to Rwanda, and I've watched a bunch of their videos. Tanzania is in Feb, so I'm really trying my best to get some backing to get on that. So Leon, with all your networks, if you know anyone, you can help me.
100%. If I can
Uh,
I'll cast a net out and see what we can do.
exactly, mate. See what I can do. I got some prospective people who are really helping. But do you know Nick Butter?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So he's basically mentoring me. So I've sent over a draft of like a really detailed form that I'm in the process of completing to send out, and he's going to really help me. So fingers crossed, that's going to be called Project 13, and I'll have yeah. I cannot wait. It just looks so exciting. So I really want to do them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that aside, one of our team members, Sophie, has actually asked. Um, how you found the training when progressing from CrossFit to ultras, like managing that around work and family. Was it much different?
Yes. I
Moving on.
think,
I'm joking.
I think to be completely honest, it's such a good question. And I think one of the reasons that I guess, the people who come towards me for coaching now do is honesty. Like, I don't make any jokes. It's not easy. The easiest element that I have to consider across the whole board when it comes to prep is the fact that I'm self-employed. That's the only element that's movable for me. I can make my all of my meetings something like this. I can put this in the middle of the day so I can do something before, I could do something after. But what people don't seem to share or realize on social media with the people that they follow is that the sacrifice is it has it's a necessary part of the process. So when I was prepping for my 250s and when I prepped for the United Kingdom, I was getting up, like I said, in Portugal. We were on holiday in Portugal, deciding whether or not we wanted to move to Portugal at the time. And I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, putting a head torch on, creeping out of the van, and making a Strava route by drawing a circle on the map, going, fuck it, that's about 20K. Let's just see what happens. And making it work because I don't want to give up the time that I'm meant to be on holiday and sacrifice the time that I have with my children or my child and wife at the time. So the transition was hard, yes, in terms of the physical element. I still did a lot of CrossFit training, which helped the robustness and helped me avoid injuries and stuff like that. But the biggest thing was time management. I went from training once per day around lunchtime to sometimes getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and running on the treadmill for an hour and a half in the garage, then doing the usual requirements that I had as a father at home, then do my business stuff, then do some strength and conditioning at lunchtime. I remember there's this distinct moment where I was like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Where I remember I'd preheated a meal and was stood in the gym doing isometric lunges with a heel raise whilst taking a fork of food off my plate. Because your time is so compressed. Because I then also had an interval session in the afternoon. So it was like, the way the transition, the hardest thing was really accepting and justifying the fact that it was going to take a lot of time. People don't want to accept that it's going to take a lot of time, especially guys. We like to say, yeah, we'll get it done, it'll be fine. But really, really just succumbing to the fact that I was like, yeah, this is going to take sacrifice. I'm not going to be able to go out and get pissed at the weekend. I might not be able to go out and hang out in the evening with the boys because I've got some interval sessions. Really, really getting my mind into that place where I was like, it's short term, it's 4 months, it's got to be done. Made it so much easier to adjust. Whereas CrossFit was just go and throw some tin around and then leave after a high five. It was a lot different.
I can imagine this, and obviously being a father now to two kids now, isn't it? Sorry, am I correct me
Yep.
wrong? You got a little one yet? Yeah. So
Yeah.
again, with myself, that's something that I'm really suffering with. I've I was speaking to a friend about it today, because it's really exciting. This what I'm doing next year. I mean, I'm also in process of training for my first 100 miler in June,
Mhm.
and it just take like you said. There's so many people see it and go, "That looks so good," but they don't realize, like you said, I often get up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm back by the time my wife is just getting up for work to help with the
Of
boy
course.
before we chuck him in the car and go to work. And then I might have to do an evening session as well, like a strength and conditioning one. And people don't see that and appreciate that it does consume your life, and it's about having that right balance. But next year with the traveling as well, I've got a lot of parent guilt, and I'm very thankful that my wife is extremely supportive. And I did have to sit down and have a
That
long
definitely
conversation.
helps.
Yeah, and be like, I got this idea. As usual, it's a bit stupid. And she was like, "Cool, tell me." And you know how the conversation goes. You've been there,
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah,
that's how the conversation of running the length of the UK came up.
yeah, exactly. So it's mental, but yeah, it's juggling. That is really, I am still juggling with the parent guilt thing, because Yeah, you're out and about and you're enjoying your run, but it's always in the back of my head. I should be home with my boy. I should be home with my wife.
Mhm.
Should be doing this. But yeah, yeah. You just mentioned then actually about the running the whole of the UK. That's a perfect transition and segue into it. So naturally, after running 250 and 220, you decided to run 840 miles across the UK in,
Yeah.
for those who don't know, 13 days, 15 hours and 5 minutes. I had to look that up.
Yeah.
Um, and what was obviously we can get into like the nitty gritty of the highs and lows and everything in with that now. But what made you want to do that? So was it one of those
Um,
moments where you just sat down and figured you want to do something even more extreme to push yourself, or was it something you've always wanted to do?
no, it was definitely in some ways the influencer was being influenced. There's no two ways about it. There was people doing incredible things. You look at the ultra space, how much it's just exploded at this last few years. There's no two ways about it. We're in the Ned Brockman running the width of Australia, and Willie Googe, a good friend of mine. Um, he was doing Transcon, I believe. No, it wasn't Transcon. What was he doing? It might have been
Oh,
Transcon.
was that with Rob Ballinger? He was helping him out with.
He was doing one of his, I believe. I feel like it might be Transcom, but it feels way too recent. But anyway, like these two people, I was following their journeys around the same sort of time. And
Mm,
unfortunately, when you follow people like this, like we just touched upon in terms of the time constraints and stuff, it starts to come into your reality and feel quite doable. So there's definitely that element of being like, well, these guys are running 100K a day. He's running across Australia. What can I do? It opens you up into this space where your horizons are broadened, whether you like it or not. So there's that element that I always have to touch upon. I'm not going to be the guy who sits there and goes, "Oh, it was my destiny to run the length of the country. It just came to me like overnight." It didn't. It was definitely being influenced by that sort of stuff and going, "I'd love to see what that feels like." And then the next thing, I'm basically just doing some of my recovery runs from Jordan, just getting on the treadmill, doing 30 minutes here and there, letting the legs flush out. And the only part of it which was just spontaneous was I always start to think, well, what do I want to do next? And for some reason, it just started saying, well, how far is the UK? There's this thing called JOGLE. People cycle it, people run it. Willie Googe had done it himself before. And I was just like, oh, that might be a good option. So I turned around and before looking at how far it was, I decide that I want to turn around and film a video as a voice, like a stamp to say like a date stamp, so that if somebody else comes out, because Ultra was quite big, I was like, well, if someone else comes out and announces it in like the next couple of weeks, I can at least say, I filmed this video in November. I'm not copying you because there's always ownership in Ultra, same as any other space. And just said that I wanted to run it in 2 weeks. And the reality meant that I had to average around 100 kilometers a day, which at that point I'd only ever run 72 kilometers in my longest day, or 73, I believe, which was in Jordan. And then I just left it. Didn't really think about it too much after that. I was like, well, it'll be something to do one day. And then the following month, we came over to Costa Rica for a month to see where we wanted to live in the world. Because while I was training for, kind of scooted over that, but while I was training for Sri Lanka and while I was training for specifically Jordan as well, we were living in different countries in a camper van. So we lived in Switzerland, we lived in Spain, we lived in part of Portugal, traveled around the UK, seeing if there was different places that we wanted to live. And the original idea was to come to Costa Rica to make a decision. We came to Costa Rica and decided to move to Costa Rica, as you do. And then we also decided to have another child. And then we also had the conversation of what do we need to do to achieve, everything that we want to leave the UK feeling satisfied. And then I just slide my phone across the table and I'm like, I feel like doing this. And my wife's just looking at me like, where does this even come from with your ADHD brain? Like, what's happening? So I decide that it's my farewell from the UK. So I was just like, what a perfect way to tie it up and leave the country is to run the entire length of it. So once we were in agreement that my wife was like, I know that whatever I say is not going to matter. You're still going to do it because of the way that my brain works. She just gave me her full support and just said, as long as you are there when I need you to be there, and as long as you're helping with the travel and the plans to move and that sort of stuff, then go for it. So we found a time in the diary, 2 weeks. I then reach out to Chris Taylor, who becomes my logistics lead. And basically now I classify him as he also became my therapist, which I didn't really think was a role that I was going to need to build while I was doing this thing. And come back from Costa Rica, and 2 weeks later, grade 3 rupture my left MCL at jiu-jitsu. Great start to prep.
Oh, no way.
Buzzing for that. So it honestly, when I look back now, I have I've seen the documentary draft twice. I still don't have all the answers to that. Bearing in mind basic, periodization and all the rest of it, perfect prep, blah blah blah, and go. I basically did it on a marathon prep. That makes no sense. Obviously, I had some skin in the game from the year before. Grade 3 rupture in my MCL, like at the start of the year, and then running it 6 months later, and it not exploding. Like none of that makes a lot of sense. But did the MCL, got a scan, found out that it was still intact from the origin insertion point. There were still fibers for me to work with. So rehab the hell out of it, then ran one of Josh Peterson's marathons with him when he was doing the marathons around the country, and he came to Norwich. I was like, there you go, first run back. We've just crashed out a marathon. Happy days. Leg's great. Following week, went and ran the UltraX Spring Trail 75K. Unfit. That sucked. And I was like, well, I've run 75, it's only 25K more, and then I've only got to do it 14 times. Buzzing. And then just I remember my coach said, if you're back running by April, we can prep you enough to get by. And I did I did the marathon in March, having ran like for 3 weeks beforehand, and then did the 75 at the start of April. So that was it. Game time. Prepped from April to the end of June. And then we went and partied in hell for a little while.
Partied in hell. I like that. Yeah, because I did read into that. I mean, obviously, for anybody who hasn't listened, um, I personally listened to off the back of Nathan's recommendation, actually, to the Lean Machines podcast that you did not long after with John talking about it, and
Yeah.
I was listening to that whilst running. And for anybody who hasn't listened, obviously, you've just mentioned your tear in your knee.
Yeah.
Um, First of all, we'll come back to that level. What were some of the highest and lowest points that? And again, I know you've addressed these previously, so I'm sure you're asked this all the time. But yeah, you must have hit some real dead points there.
Yeah. Do you mean before or during the actual event?
During, so you set off, and obviously you've gone through the fact that you've already got this rupture, and then obviously I'm assuming you got you were able to hit what the points you needed to hit in order to actually go out and do it. While speaking to your coach, you get out there, and then I mean, was it in the first week you did it again, the same injury?
No. So the big thing, like just to refer to some of the challenges that you're having at the moment in terms of like funding for next year.
Hmm.
Now, getting to the start line in itself was an achievement for me. So one of the
Hmm.
biggest highs was genuinely sitting there in this cabin the night before, and everyone was arriving. My film crew were there. I had my logistics lead. I had one of my best friends, Josh, who was my masseuse. I remember sitting there going, how did we arrive here? Because again, another misconception is that this stuff's cheap. Like I paid for everything. I had sponsors and everything like that, but I was already financially contracted to them. So whether they gave me money or not to support the event, I couldn't, with Nike, they weren't going to let me wear, I wasn't allowed to wear anything otherwise. So none of my sponsors parted with any money to support the event. So the entirety of the event and bringing 6 people along, filming a documentary, feeding everybody, housing everybody, and building this whole event. I was at that point around 25 grand in the bin of my own money. So I'm sitting there going, now all of that freedom, all of that stress just disappeared. I was like, screw it, I'm here now. Money's gone. We can just go to work and we can just have some fun.
Yeah.
Whereas the lead up was so much stress, so much uncertainty. Have I spent all this money and I'm going to pull up after 50K because my knee won't take it, you know? But when you arrive, there's this really sweet, beautiful intermediate period, which everybody has before a multi-stage ultra, in my opinion, where all of the work is done and you're there. Sometimes it's when people register and they go into registration, they get their number. Sometimes it's in the hotel before and you just relax in your bed. The event hasn't started, but it kind of has. And you have this in between period where you're like, God, this is fucking amazing, you know, and it's a real pure moment. And that was the biggest high of the whole thing, not even completing it or anything like that. It doesn't compare to what that sense of achievement I had just sitting there going, I've just set up like my cold plunge on the deck outside, and I'm like, it's here. We arrived. Like the process is where the beauty was, and it was a real celebration that I just had to myself. But then, yeah, I think the part that you're referring to was like we did the first 4 days, 100 kilometers a day. Day 5, I woke up. My right knee was the size of a football, which wasn't the knee that I ruptured the MCL on, but obviously compensation patterns and all that kind of stuff. It took quite a bit of a hiding. And I couldn't really walk. The IT band was just, everyone knows what ITB syndrome feels like. It feels like your knees being ripped apart, you know. So had after about 4K, had a load of acupuncture and treatment on the side of the road, and then basically just said, I need to go to sleep, which is the first time I've ever napped on a course in my life. So slept in a car park for half an hour, just to essentially, the way that my brain works is I have to leave very bluntly negative energy behind. And it's not just a case of waking up and going or deciding, right, it's a new day, you know, but when I do a little nap, it adds as like a little junction moment where I'm like, I'm either going to continue on this downward spiral mentally, or I'm going to be able to go, boom, stop it here and then start with a fresh mind. So I asked the guys to go and get me a tuna melt and a coffee from Costa, wake me up with it, and then we'll try again. And then ended up walking for 70 kilometers. Got chased
Mm.
out of a couple of field by some cows because we got lost on Strava. Honestly, it was a absolute mess of a day, like absolute mess of a day. But that's where the challenge started. You know, everything else had been relatively smooth until that point, and I'm breaking PBs. I'm running 100 kilometers a day. My feet are blowing up, and I'm tired and I'm broken. But I've been there. This was the first time where I really got truly tested mentally. So the lows preceded that after day 5, day 6, 7, and 8 by far the lowest days that I've ever experienced in my life, collective.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
what is that purely because, so for context, did you have to adapt to the plan? Like, did you have to carry on walking? Because I remember listening to the
Yeah.
podcast and you said something that you actually had to adapt a certain way of running just
Yeah.
to keep going forward.
So that was the evolution out of the back of this next stage. So day 6 and 7, day 6, I walked 100 kilometers straight, which was 22 hours. Woke up, went to the camper van, slept for an hour, got back up and continued to walk for another 96 kilometers, I think it was that day. And then the next day did exactly the same, slept for 2 hours. And then basically what happened is it went from excitement to a little bit of down to, quite bluntly, Chris, my logistics lead, said, we need to hit England in the next 2 days or the challenge is off. Because obviously at this point, he's experienced me just walking. He knows how much time we've got. I can't extend it by 3 or 4 days. It had to be 14 days, make or bust, essentially. So the relentless nature of this next 3 days, which ensued, I'm a people pleaser. So not only am I questioning whether I'm going and doing too much, am I making, causing irreversible damage to both my mind and my body? Can I do this? Is it worth it? Financial stress of the charity. I really want to achieve this, but is it, all these questions. I'm also seeing my team absolutely exhausted. The people looking after me are sleeping in the van. The people looking after me are out there with me. walking at a ridiculously slow pace with walking poles, of which I'd never used before because my ego was way too big. And then I'm solely dependent upon them, 24/7. That it was just low, And when I remember we touched the sign, the England sign, and it was so mixed that in some ways I wish I hadn't have touched it, because I was like, now it means that I've got to continue. And it was like that moment of, how much do you want it now? You thought that you wanted to achieve this next milestone, but then I'm like, Wigan's just around the corner. Like, come on, it's such a hard place to run through. And then I got into the van, my body just shut down, and I was jackhammering and like shaking all over the place, and I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate. I was convinced the sun was inside the van, but it was 10:30 at night. I was so delirious and in so much pain physically that we literally at that point just said, the challenge is still on, well done. But we had to literally see how I was going to wake up each day, because I was in such a state that night that nobody knew whether I was going to wake up 4 hours later ready to run, or wake up 4 hours later and be ready for hospital. It was pretty much that serious. So what happened was, the next day was when the new run came out. So I started the day the same as every other day, which was solely dependent on the poles. Like, I was getting I had tricep DOMs and shoulder DOMs and mid back DOMs from how much weight the poles were taking, because essentially my ankle joints has swelled up so much that I was not getting any flexion and extension. So they were kind of freezed into a position, and I'd got such severe blisters all over my feet that both of my heels were basically going to come off, which I didn't realize they came off when I got to Land's End. So putting my feet in
Jesus.
trainers was like the worst experience of the whole event. So they were just completely trashed. So I put them on, start walking, and then the blisters would calm down a little bit, just distract yourself. And then that day, Chris was like, "You want to try a little bit of running?" And I was just like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought about running for the last 3 days. This is a nice little walk across the country." And tried to run how I was, but the pain was so excruciating, prior, trying to run like a nice stride, 7-minute kilometer pace. My body just couldn't do it. So the way that I describe what happened was, imagine trying to run whilst holding a 50-pound note between your butt cheeks. So I turned my feet out, clenched my glutes to support my hips a little bit more. And then I narrowed my gait phenomenally. So it became like a bit of a shuffle. So I started to shuffle, and my heel, the outside edge of my heel would scrape as I started to run. And I was like, oh, this feels really, really weird. Then I'd walk and then do it a little bit longer. And then I'd walk. And then by the end of the day, I was running for 4, 5, 6 kilometer stints, and my heart rate was staying quite beautifully low. Obviously, it can be misleading with the amount of fatigue that was in my system at that point, but it was actually a really nice mental, oh, okay, I can do this. So
Mm.
that's where the upward curve of progression came from. The next day, instead of walking for the first 2 hours, I walked for the first hour and started to run. And then the following day, instead of walking for an hour, I walked for 20 minutes. And then by the last 3 or 4 days, I was starting with the poles, but then running within 5 minutes. And it was unreal. And then final few days were the highs, running 7.5, 8-minute kilometer pace at that point, which feels slow. But when you've run 1,000 kilometers, you're flying along.
That's mad. And you had a really good turnout, didn't you? You had a lot of people come out and support you, like friends and community and stuff. Like, it's like met you randomly and
Yeah, it was, people went out and wrote chalk messages all over the street in different places and stuff, which was really nice. And then a friend, Johnny Davies, who's like big in the run space now, we didn't even know each other, and he suddenly turns up as I'm running across the Wales to come across the bridge back into Bristol, and he comes and runs some distance with me. I got a surprise video message from Tom Hardy, who was connected to the charity that I was raising money for, and I cried my eyes out because he's such like a big person in my history that I'm like, I love him for his movies. I love him for his down to earth personality. I love jujitsu, and he does jujitsu. And like moments like that was absolutely magic. And then you cross that Bristol Bridge and it feels like party time. You know, you still got nearly 400 kilometers to run, but it's something about arcing around that North Devonshire coast where you suddenly go, you know what? I can almost see the end in sight. And that was like, I remember that day so definitively because it was the first day in 4 days that I had belief. Because at that between that grey period, what it felt like manic. Not that I'm gonna classify myself as clinically depressed, that would be absurd, but that's what I would say that that section felt like. And then going around, coming over that bridge and coming around was the first time I started to believe again that I could actually finish this thing. And it was, yeah, like a drug.
So it is, isn't it? It is like a drug. I can imagine. It sounds like almost like the rehab of the injuries kind of took over or took precedence over the mileage in the end, and you had to focus more on the rehab and changing and adapting the way you were running in order to even move forward. And it's good that you're able to kind of switch again. That's the strength and the kind of mindset that you've got mentally, because a lot of other people 100% would have gone, fuck this. I'm not walking like John Wayne, like clenching my ass and then just, why am I doing this and just giving up there and then. But the fact that you're
Of
able to
course.
power through it's unreal. It's unreal. With that, I can't even imagine. It's like when I talk to Nathan, because obviously he's doing the whole Welsh coastal path soon, 870 miles.
Yep.
I've never run even close to that. I mean, how did you cope with, obviously, with your history and knowledge and experience with fluid intake and that type of thing? And did that play a big part? Like, did you have a nutritionist there that was monitoring your carbs, your sodium, or did you just
That
kind
was
of
all
do it?
me.
Would
Yeah,
you?
so I did all of that myself because I'm a sports nutrition coach and a fuel and strategy specialist within the ultra stage. So the first time I actually did an ultra, I brought someone in to do all of the basics to make sure that I was looking at the really nitty-gritty stuff. And then with this, obviously I'd done a few ultras at this point, so I knew the learnings of I'm not living on bloody dehydrated meals if I don't need to, for one, and the considerations of heat and what my appetite and satiety actually feels like. So when it gets hot, I can't eat. It's just the way that I am. I have to drink my carbohydrate intake. So the biggest consideration was I don't want to crap my pants, and the closest way that that's going to happen, the highest likelihood of that happening is if I'm taking gels on every hour. So I
Mm.
took about 100 gels with me just in case, and they were like, worst case scenario, I'll have a gel. So what I decided is to try to get as much of my nutrition through fresh fruit and actual food, single ingredient foods. I was eating 10, sometimes 15 small oranges a day, peaches, bananas, blueberries, blackberries, anything that I could get my hands on. But my body felt so much better for it. And it was a conversation, this built out of a conversation that I had with Sean Conway when he was doing his Ironmans. And we were talking during a marathon that I ran with him in prep. And he was saying himself is like, when you're doing something for that long, your body has to have ingredients and nutrition that it understands and recognizes. So whereas like when you're doing the 250s, you've got weight limits, you've got travel considerations, and you've got only hot water available. Whereas when you're doing your own event and you've got your camper van and you've got a gas stove and you've got shops all the way along the route, really look at the basic nutrition that you can actually pick up. So that was my major thing was no gels unless I needed them, no
Mm.
caffeine unless I really, really needed it, and then just try to essentially get on as much as I possibly could edibly. But then all of the liquid intake that I was having throughout the day always had carbohydrates on. So we were always like it will haunt both Chris and Josh, who were my support leads, to the day that they die. The smell of red berry carbohydrate fuel 5, which is from my major sponsor, UltraX Endurance, where I was drinking that all day. Literally would be maybe 200 or 300 grams of the carbs that I was getting in was purely just in this. And then yeah, you've got like salt tabs and stuff like that, where if it was like a super hot day, we were meeting like checkpoint wise every 10 to 12 kilometers. If things started to get super hot, I wouldn't condone this to anyone else, so please don't take this as pure nutrition advice, but I would sometimes take a concentrated salt tab as a preventative rather than try if things were to get really wrong. Like a lot of people will have salt tabs if they start to feel that really gritty white stained sweat and they've been out in it for a while. Whereas what I would actually do, because my body can deal with it quite well, is if I'm like, we're going into a really hot patch now and it's set to get quite warm over the next couple of checkpoints, I would take it as a preventative tool because I like to avoid cramps altogether rather than experience them and then try to manage them because I'm a little wussy when it comes to that. So I was doing things like that. And then everything seemed to go quite well. I was obviously burning between 8 and 10,000 calories a day and consuming 3 or 4,000 at best, unfortunately, was where, I was peaking with my appetite where I just couldn't get food in. There's no two ways about it. Like when you get that fatigued and you're feeling that crap, it sounds really weird. Again, with ultra, the misconception is that if you just want to eat all the time, but when fatigue hits at that level, you just don't want to. You just want to sleep. So
Mm.
it resulted in me losing about 8 or 9 kilos, I think it was, across the 2 weeks, which is absolutely savage. Um, but yeah, nutrition wise, I would just tell the boys, they'd ask me what I wanted 2 or 3 kilometers from the next checkpoint. Oh, Leon, there's a Costa around the corner, or oh, there's a Sainsbury's, or we're going to be meeting at a garage. Is there anything that you want? And then they'd send a message through. And then when I got there, I'd either pick it up and carry on, or I'd have some mild treatment and then eat my sandwich on the massage bed, and away we went.
Eat your sandwich whilst doing lunges.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, isn't it? I'm for this big challenge next year, and also for the 100. I'm assuming you've probably heard of Precision Fuel and Hydration.
Yeah.
Really good company. They're one that they've kind of put a plan together for me. Because I'm like you, when I'm even though I know I should be eating, because you're so tired and you need that food. It's
Yep.
just I can't do it either. I struggle to eat when I'm running,
Yeah.
and it makes me feel very sick. And so I'm trying to get some kind of strategy, and they've got this new flow gel stuff, which basically, and it comes with a flow bottle, and it tells you exactly, like in the plan, exactly how many carbs I should be having an hour and all that type of stuff, and the sodium. And they got these bottles now where every hour you have a drink, and it tells you how much you've had, and that's got everything you need in it for that hour. And as long as you're
Yeah.
sticking to that, but obviously they also stress, like you said, to eat real food alongside it, because
Yeah.
to try and run 100 miles or 100K or whatever in a day just on gels and that type of thing, I can almost guarantee that you're going to get some kind of GI problem or some kind of
Oh,
stomach issue.
100%.
Because
Yeah.
I,
Unless
I
you go, I've used to think that I had steel guts. Really did. I was like, I used to eat moldy bread. I used to eat stuff when I was on a building site when I was younger, covered in sawdust. And so it's fine. I can eat anything. But yeah, looking after your GI is like any form of digestive discomfort. It's probably one of, I would say, people's biggest fears. And when you've got
mm,
anxieties around it as well, it's never going to be a good cocktail if you're putting in things that are essentially there for the half marathon and marathon world. When you transition into the ultra space, nutrition does get murky and it does become very, very personalized. For one person, I could give them a strategy which was predominantly liquid based, but for another person, I couldn't. I would have to give them actual real foods, and they'll turn around and go out with a jam sandwich and they'll absolutely love it. But for some people, it'd give them heartburn and they'll be burping and they'd feel like absolute crap. So there's lots of different strategies and approaches for a lot of people, but I think the biggest thing that I always say with ultra strategy for fueling is there's always the strategy and then there's a reality.
mm,
There's prepping and preparing as much as you possibly can, but when you get 5, 6 hours in, it's just a case of try to be conscious and try to remember to consistently have something. And if you don't hit it every single hourly window that you have, it's not uncommon. It doesn't really, it's not going to be the end of your race, but you just have to make sure that you adapt and not, because I find a lot of people when they get mentally fatigued, if they miss an hourly window at 6, 7 hours in and they're like, oh, I should have had this granola bar in the last hour, they can really fascinate over it and really beat themselves up and go, oh, does this mean that I'm now going to cramp up? Does this mean that I'm not going to be able to finish the race? And the spiral that can happen mentally under fatigue is quite phenomenal. So I always
mm,
say to people, this is what we would love, But just bear in mind, we don't know what's going to happen when you're absolutely smashed, you know? So we'll just take the best that we possibly can. Some people, I'll make them make notes of remember to eat, or set alarms on their phone, eat, drink, consume, where it comes up at certain points where I'm like, peak fatigue is going to be punching you in the face. This is where you're going to need the help and support.
Yeah, that's true. That's what I'm looking at doing. Actually, I've read into it a lot, and I'll be honest with you. I got my first 100 in June, and I haven't even worked it out yet on my Garmin. I need to set an alarm every hour to say eat, because I am bad at, like yourself, my ADHD brain. If I get talking to somebody and I forget, and 2 hours in, I'm like, oh shit, I haven't eaten anything. I got talking about. It's like when you're on these calls, by the end of it, you know everything about them and they know everything about you, and you forget to do the essential things. And
Yeah.
I think the worst mistake you can make is thinking, I'm feeling great. I'll run past this checkpoint. I'll go to the
Oh
next one.
yeah, that's
Well,
stupid.
don't do
Game
that.
over.
Yeah, don't do that.
No,
But
now the
it's,
biggest thing with GI, if you want to make sure that your guts are all right, probably a tip for most people is have your hourly window in which that you want to consume, but also to put the least amount of stress on your gut, especially if you're somebody who's sensitive, is try to cut that hourly window into 20-minute segments. Because if you put less food in the gut when it's already got a lot less blood, because the blood's in the extremities, it's going to have a lot less work to do to break it down to utilize it. So if you think some people will try to consume all of their calories at 30 minutes into the hour, great. But that's a lot more food volume that the body's got to try and, or the gut's got to try and digest and do something with most of its blood being in the extremities. So with a lower supply of blood, it needs to have a lower volume of food for it to be able to deal with. So it's a little tip that I give to most people is, say, for instance, crude example, you've got 300 calories, or say it was just a gel, right? God forbid, say it was a gel that you had to consume in the hour. At 20 minutes, I would say consume half of that gel. And then at 40 minutes, consume the other half of that gel, because it's less stress on the gut. So things like that can really help as well.
that's a really useful tip. Thank you, Leon, because actually, yeah, I'm concerned that I'm going to be so anxious about getting it right that I'm going to overthink it and either end up overeating or undereating. And I mean, it's all part of the plan,
If you
isn't
if
it, at the
you
end of the day?
overeat, honestly, I will eat this mic.
Oh yeah, yeah. I won't be overeating. Yeah, it's mad though, because at the end of the runs, I always think, God, I ate so much, and I look back and I think, no, I didn't. I ate nowhere near as much as I would when I'm sat in the office doing nothing. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it just feels stressful because it's a completely different environment. But yeah, that's really useful to know. Thank you for that, because, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, including Nathan, who's running the 870 soon in July. That's just going to be really helpful. A question actually from one of their other team members, Jen. You've got a bit of an interesting but potentially controversial anecdote to pain, haven't you, and how to deal with it? Is that right?
uh, I don't know. I think, something that happened with the joggle run still hasn't fully made sense to myself or the people that I speak to about. And I'm like, I'm not gonna lie. It does sound woo-woo. It does. And people are like, there's no bro attitude attached to it. There's no David Goggins sitting over here in this chair trying to alpha everybody. It's really not. And literally just going to say it how it was.
Mm,
Now, only the people who were with me will ever know just how much pain that I was actually in, to the point
mm,
where they were worried about me beyond the event, quite honestly. Now, I'd been dealing with the way that I used to deal with pain was distraction. So when something gets uncomfortable, I would distract my mind away from the pain by, for instance, in a couple of the days, a car would come past me. I'd be like, "Oh, Land Rover. It's got a Great British sticker on the left-hand side. It's a V6. The number plate is XY63DXN, whatever. Oh, there was three people in it. Oh, that was a weird one. It had a flag in the back. So, and then when it would get hard, I would try and recite the car and try to memorize it. So I would play games like that to distract myself. And then when I was in Jordan and it got really rough, I would try to remember a member of the team who was running, or somebody who I interacted with at the checkpoint. What were they wearing? What was their name again? How many bracelets did they have on? Did they do my water, or did they do my electrolytes? What did they actually do to help? What color was their hair? What color was their eyes? Were they wearing any rings? Like things like that, where you can really distract your mind massively away from, oh my God, this sucks. And you start playing games like that. But what happened with the UK run was I was in too much pain everywhere to distract. So I was trying to distract. And what unfortunately it does, it still takes mental capacity for you to distract. Even if it's a good tool, it's still capacity that's taken away from you doing what you need to do, which is move forward. And I just became
Mm.
completely exhausted and had a constant headache. And what happened was, this is where I sound like a mentalist. I turned around and went, all right, literally had an outward and inward verbal conversation with the pain that I was feeling in my body and just said, look, you've been pissing me off for the last 4 days, but we are now nearly 400 kilometers on from when you kept screaming at me. I'm still going to move forward and you can stay if you want to. It's absolutely fine, but I'm still going to get this thing done. So carry on, have at it. And what happened in the next 24 to 48 hours was the most remarkable experience of my life, which was all of the swelling in my knee started to go, the function in my ankles started to come back, my recovery started to improve, my appetite started to come back in a rampant fashion. And yes, I was still in pain. Yes, I was still starting the day with walking poles and stuff like that. But you can even see it in my Strava data. The last 3 or 4 days of that run were almost as strong as the first 3 or 4 days. And I was recovering. I was running faster. I was eating better. My mental state was better. The pain was like a 2 or 3 out of the 10, just in general. It just dissipated. And all of the
Right.
inflammation started to subside. And what I'd realized is that when you look at it deeper than just the event, pain is simply a signal, right? Yes, it means that you have to address something, but it's like a petulant child that wants your attention. It will just keep nagging and nagging and nagging. And sometimes you do have to back away. Sometimes you do have to action it. Sometimes, you might have your leg blown off in a war. If it's spurting out blood, you need to obviously action something. But your body will still react in its pain signaling, just the same as if you've got a swollen knee, but you can still crack on. It's still going to give you the same level of, oh my God, this is horrendous. We need to sort something out. So once I gave it the aired it and went, all right, paid attention to it, gave it
Oh,
some space to breathe, it suddenly just went, oh, okay, you've given me the attention I need, and then it disappeared. So every time it would come back in waves at that point, I would communicate with it and go, I hear you. It's all good. I hear you. We're
that's
still moving
mad.
forward. It's fine.
That's
And it's
crazy, isn't it?
something that I teach with a lot of my clients now who struggle with their own mental capacity. And when it gets hard and you're at peak fatigue, they're not very good at translating the signals. All of the signals just seem to be bad and worrying. It's the same, and it's something that I work with those guys with when it comes to pain. I'm like, how averse are you to pain? Because if you're somebody who hates it if you stub your toe and it will ruin your day. I'm like, we need to do a lot of work now because when you get to 70K, everything's going to be in pain. And if you don't back yourself and you don't understand that it's simply just a signal, you're not going to be able to distinguish where you are in that hierarchy of, is this just discomfort that I can work through? Or is this potentially, I say life threatening, but quality of life threatening, because that's
Mm.
the biggest thing people have to go into a race with, is they have to understand and distinguish where the line is.
Yeah,
Somebody I talked about him before, someone like David Goggins doesn't really have a line, and that's self-destruction in my opinion. But everybody else has to have a line when they go into these races of how much they're willing to suffer, how much they maybe want to suffer, what's the line, and that's one of the biggest things that I work with all my clients. I'm like, great, so as long as we're always towing towards the right side of that line on pain, discomfort, nutrition, hours, whatever it may well be, then amazing, we can keep moving forward. And you just have to go through that process with everyone.
I think that's a really important point because I'm sure there's a lot of physios or whoever will be like, oh God, no, don't say that. Don't encourage people to push through it. But everybody should be able to do, deals with pain on a regular basis, whether it be stubbing your toe or jamming your hand in a door or
Yep.
whatever it might be. But it's having that clarity where, like you said, is this going to get you to the end of the race and you're going to be able to get in the car and drive home and continue being a family man or husband, wife, whatever? Or is
Yep.
this now, are you now bridging the gap where you're actually starting to affect your life And it's not a long-term approach. Like, you need to stop. Like, this is too much. We can, like, which I'm sure at some stages during the joggle, some of your friends were probably like, fuck, we're getting to a point now we might actually have to pull the plug here because this is getting too much. So I think it's, as long as people know that what you're saying, it's it's very clever what you're saying, because you're not saying don't kill yourself, but you're saying you can deal with pain as long as you
Yeah.
know that it's not going to kill you, basically.
Yeah, dealing with
Yeah.
pain in the short time is fine. And you, like, for me, I can switch it on and off if I need
Mm.
to, but the reason in which that I'm switching it off is the most important thing to value. You know, if it's worth it enough and it's not going to ruin your life, it's a constant balance, then that's where I do get broy and go, screw it, shut up, crack on. But if it's
Yeah.
not worth it, I'm still just as matter of fact as the other way around, where I said to Chris and my team before, I was like, if I'm not going to finish this in 14 days and it becomes apparent at 12 that I can't finish it in 14 days, I'm going to quit, because
Yeah.
that's where I'm very matter of fact about things. The pain's not worth it if it's not going in the right direction. So for me, that
Mm.
pain was worth it if I could still finish in 14 days or less, because of all the other considerations that I had. But if it meant I had to be out there for 16, 17 days, it wasn't going to be worth it. So
No.
distinguishing in those lines in the preparation phase is really important. Whereas too many people focus all of their energy on just running all the time. I'm like, what you don't realize is the biggest element of whether you're going to finish an ultra or not is your mental state. You know, I've
Yeah.
just proved that from having run 32 marathons in 13 and a half days. I've prepped on a 15-week marathon prep. That is not a physical preparation to run a multi-stage ultra and do something like that. But the way in which that I approached it with my mental state is what got me to that finish line. And it's something that you'll witness when you see the documentary, is it wasn't a physical state that got me there. It was a mental state.
Yeah. And I think
Date
it's,
when that's coming out.
oh, there you go. Nathan's back.
Hopefully later this year. Final draft should be with me in the next 2 or 3 days. And then when I'm like, yep, sign off, happy days, it will go to film festivals, Netflix, and people like that as well. And then I would like to say in the final quarter of this year that will be out latest. But unfortunately, with that kind of thing, it's jumping through a lot of different hoops before just dropping it. So I will be shouting loud and proud everywhere when it's out.
I can imagine, mate. I can imagine. It's honestly can't wait to see it. It's the same with, I said the same to Nick Butter, because obviously he still hasn't even been able to release a documentary regarding his marathon in every country in the world. And when I met him,
Yes.
first thing I said was, mate, come on, where is it? And he was like, trust me, it's nothing to do with me. This is, like you said, all the hoops you got to jump through. But
Yeah.
I think I can speak for everyone when I say that we are so excited. It's funny, really, just to see how much pain, how much pain and suffering you went through. We can
There's a
finally,
lot. There's a lot of
yeah,
pain.
see it. Yeah. But so Nate, sorry, you're back, mate.
I've been
Any
back a
questions on this?
while. Yeah, I've been
Oh, have you?
back a while. Yeah, I got into a mode where I'm so used to watching Leon's YouTube, I just shut up and listened for ages without asking a question.
Appreciate that.
But how did you feel as you run towards that on that drive towards Land's End, that final like half a K?
Emotional, to be honest. And very disassociated. I felt a bit like there was there was excitement and pride and all of, you know, the emotions that you would expect coming towards the end, but there was so much disbelief of how you'd weathered that storm. Like there's still patches and days and times that still don't add up. But I just remember like I'm running and I'm weeping as I'm running towards Land's End. And I'm like, I remember coming to visit this place when I was hobbling in February because I'd ruptured the MCL and we were just up in Cornwall. And I just said, can we just drive down there for like a visual? And I stood there with my daughter underneath the art or the main entrance, which has, you know, Land's End written on it. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know what it's going to feel like when I get there. And I'm still like holding, putting no weight on this leg, but I still had the belief that we were going to get there. But I think the thing is the way that I coach people, and it's something that I always preach about. No matter how I thought it was going to feel, and however it looks like it felt when you view it, it didn't feel anywhere near as good as it was supposed to. in your mind.
Mm.
It felt like there was a lot of thank God for that. A lot of I can't believe I'm here. A lot of I can't wait to see my family. And it didn't feel so triumphant like a lot of people will say with ultras. There was just a lot of relief. You know, it was like, thank God I can rest now. You know, what I was so phenomenally proud of was once I'd rested, it wasn't the medal, it wasn't the achievement, it wasn't like apparently like a top 10 time in history, which is pretty cool for the ego. It was the fact that the process that we went through, getting to the start line, felt better than crossing the finish line. And it's something that I preach to all of my athletes is that you must indulge in the process because the finish never feels as good as what you think it does. It's also, it's always riddled with relief. And thank God that's done. You know, ultra is not about running across the line and being like, oh my God, this is amazing for much more than 10 to 20 seconds. It's just as much tears of joy of thank God that's over, you know, because
Yeah.
it is a war, you know, and you won't celebrate. You don't always just celebrate at the end of a war. It's normally relief that you feel.
Relief that you're alive.
Yeah.
I mean,
How did you cope mentally? So like after you finished, so obviously your body was fucked, but
Yeah.
how were you mentally after it?
Very numb. Like it took me probably 2 or 3 weeks to have patience and have like presence in the room. Like I didn't really speak that much. Like my wife found it really hard to get any sort of conversation, and I was really, I'd basically just sit in a room and stare quite a lot. It was really like solitary, was probably be the best way to describe it for about 2 weeks.
And what about physically? Did you have to undergo any kind of like treatment afterwards on your body, or was there like a huge delay in terms of getting back up and running, doing any kind of physical exercise? Or
So the biggest thing that you realize with most people in the acute phase, we all walk like we're dying for like 3 or 4 days anyway. Everything just stiffens up. But also in the acute phase, there's a lot of protecting from the body. Everything like if you've got any injuries and pain and issues like that, it doesn't tend to happen or come out straight away. It normally just protects itself, a little bit of inflammation and all that sort of stuff. And then it will start to calm itself down. If your knee's pissed off, it will happen after about 4 days. And so to begin with, I was just trying to manage the feet. All the heels basically just came off. The bottom of my feet came off on one of them. And then after about 10 days is when I wanted to run again to see if I could, and shuffled along and the body felt okay. And then the real issues started for me actually after 2 months later when I went and ran a marathon for one of my sponsors. I went over to Munich and ran the Munich marathon like an absolute turd. And after that, I had, which to be honest, is only really, really gone now. I would say gone. I've managed it quite well. It's still in the background, but had an issue called osteitis pubis, which is essentially a huge overuse of all of the deep tissue muscles and connective tissue and ligaments and tendons that connect to your pubis symphysis. And it gets separated or twisted and pulled out of balance or alignment. And that pain, like I basically slept for 6 months with a pillow between my knees because closing my knees completely, my pelvic girdle was just fucked. And that was something that I was in denial about because I was worried about telling people that it was an issue. But once I actually faced it, I basically just did all of the pelvic the pelvic girdle work and the postpartum work that my wife had to do for our children. And now it seems to be in a place where I'm running pain-free again. But that was something that went on for like 6 to 8 months, which is, you know, pretty much what you'd expect from running that far on a marathon prep.
Well, I mean, it kind of, I bet your wife to a certain extent was like, yeah, this is what we have to deal with. We don't have
Of
to run
course.
that. We just have to deal with it when we're childbearing and giving birth and all that. So enjoy.
Yeah. And on the subject of children, I think my wife is actually going to bring my son in just a second because she's got to go and pick up my daughter in a moment. So you might see just one hand. You might actually see me just rocking my son. So I'm gonna have to speed things up shortly.
Yeah, no worries, mate. We'll call it a day soon because obviously it's taking a big chunk up. And thank you so much for coming on. I just think just one last question, really. I wanted to ask personally, less Nathan's going is: have you got any big challenges in the making in Costa Rica or otherwise?
So the main thing right now is I'm going to be running UltraX Nevada 220 in October. So that's my next big race. I'm going to be supporting my wife in the Nasarathon. She's running a half marathon over here in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm going to go and support her and take the fueling strategy and stuff for her so she can just get the run done and enjoy it. And that's it at the moment. There's no major ridiculous challenges and stuff that I've been looking at. It's purely just we've started a whole new life out here, so I'm really indulging in finding my space over here as a family member and as a businessman as well. But the big ones like now, like I want to actually race in some of the events, like all the things that I've done to complete. I've not gone in with, I want to actually compete here. So Nevada will, all things going well, will be my first proper, let's have a proper go at this and see where we're at.
Wicked. You'll have to tell me, I'll have to speak to you about that when you've done it, because that's not obviously one of the ones I'll be doing next year. So,
Of course.
yeah, I'll be coming to you about that. Awesome. Well, Nate, have you got anything to add, mate?
No.
No. Well,
one question. So do you think all those years of CrossFit helped you with the suffering part of like ultra running, where you go
anything
like pretty deep into a wad?
Yeah, I think any form of discomfort that you have, whether it be long periods of stress with work, whether it be CrossFit WODs, whether it be hardcore Pilates, if you've been in a position where you've had to suffer, you are going to be working on that mental capacity.
That's true. That's very true. We touched on that at the beginning, didn't we? It's definitely got to play a part because although the CrossFit workouts, not all of them, but a lot of them are short, there's so much volume that goes into them, and it definitely tests you. So that's great. Thank you, Leon, and thank you so much for coming on. I know this is like you said at the start, I'm just amazed that we actually got to make this happen with you being all the way over there and everything. But really, really thoroughly enjoyed speaking to you, and I know everyone is going to as well. And just thanks so much for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the time, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Leon.
Thanks, Leon. We'll keep in contact.
Cheers, guys. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, Leon. Take it easy, mate. Cheers, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye. As always, thank you so much to everyone who was tuned in, listened, and subscribed to all of our episodes. We've had some amazing guests, and Leon is no exception. Really enjoyed the day. Thank you for listening. Good luck to everyone competing at the Hewham, actually, the Pegasus event this weekend up in Mid Wales. Beautiful race, and that was actually my first official ultra. So sending luck to everyone doing that. Also, I want to shout out to a local guy, Jacob Lamb. He's actually running from North Wales to South Wales over 5 days. He started day one today. He's doing more than 30 miles a day. I think it's in excess of 25,000 feet as well in elevation. And he's doing it all for Dementia UK. So if you get a chance, please head over to his Instagram, which is at Lamb with a double B 18. And support him. And well done, Jacob. We're all behind you, mate. And and also I think Nate, is there a Why We Run meet coming up you want to talk about?
Yeah, week Saturday, so I think it's the 12th of May. Meeting at the car park at Penavan at 10 o'clock, and they're doing the fan dance loop. So bigger than normal, bit of elevation, stunning views. It'd be nice to get as many running clubs up there as possible from South Wales, just to have one big, massive group meet. Be awesome.
Hell yeah. That'd be amazing. I literally, it's the first time I've heard about this today. I must have missed that one. So yeah, I'll try my best to get there. But nice one, guys. Thank you again so much for listening. Keep tuning in, keep subscribing, and thank you so much for all of your support. And yeah, thank you. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Bye.
Bye.